Scotland is a resource-rich country. For the past 5 decades, Scotland has produced trillions of dollars worth of oil and gas. Since 1989 to 2023, the value of Scottish oil to the UK has been more than £14 trillion, and that's according to Westminster's own figures. Now Scotland is experiencing a renewable energy boom. So as those energy bills continue to land on the doormats of homes throughout Scotland, it's reasonable to ask why Scots are continuing to pay among the highest energy prices in Europe, and why more than 30% of our fellow citizens are living in fuel poverty. For the last 50 years, Scotland's oil and gas sector has provided a lifeline for the UK, staving off near bankruptcy in the early 1970s. From the mid-1940s to the mid-1970s, the UK was the heaviest user of the International Monetary Fund and was in a precarious economic position. But as oil was discovered in Scottish waters, the UK government, which closed down Scotland's stock exchange in 1973 just as the black gold was coming ashore, commissioned Professor Gavin McCrone, a leading economist at the time, to assess the value of these oil reserves to Scotland. In his report presented to the Cabinet Office in April 1975, he revealed that an independent Scotland's budget surpluses would be so large as to be embarrassing, and that Scotland's currency would be the hardest in Europe, with the exception perhaps of the Norwegian krone. From being poorer than their southern neighbours thanks largely to deindustrialisation, Scotland would now be in a position to lend heavily to England, and this situation could last for a very long time into the future, he concluded. With the SNP launching its campaign in the 1970s under the slogan "It's Scotland's Oil," UK government ministers feared the report could lead to Scottish independence if made public, so they buried the evidence for more than 30 years. And whilst Norway retained a large public ownership of its oil and gas reserves, and went on to create a sovereign wealth fund worth more than $1.7 trillion, the London government sold off Scotland's oil and gas assets to multinational companies. As a result, Scotland has no sovereign wealth fund, not one single penny. What's more, the government in England gave the most advantageous tax breaks to mostly foreign oil companies, companies which now own Scotland's oil resources. At one point, the London government even paid Shell a tax rebate of more than £140 million, whilst Norway continued to make considerable profits on its oil. Even after devolution, with the formation of the Westminster-led and controlled Scottish Parliament in 1999, Scotland's oil and gas industry remained solely in the hands of the government in London. So when the second independence referendum came about in 2014, after the SNP won a majority of seats in Holyrood, the UK narrative of Scotland is too weak and too reliant on England to survive on its own was ramped up across all UK-controlled mainstream media outlets. Scots were told by the government in England and the Better Together campaign that the oil had all but run out, so Scotland would not be able to survive without England to bail it out. These claims were made despite a report in 2013 by UK Oil and Gas, which said that they had already identified 11.4 billion barrels of oil left in Scottish waters, worth at least £1.5 trillion. Laughably, the UK government continued to claim Scotland was running a fiscal deficit. And the independence campaign lost the referendum, based largely on such lies continually repeated by the mainstream media. Underlining the oil's running out lie, 9 years later the then Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, announced the granting of well over 100 new oil and gas licences in Scottish waters. Now, under Keir Starmer's Labour government, London is closing down Scotland's only oil refinery at Grangemouth, despite it being profitable, in order to make Scotland artificially dependent on England to process its remaining oil. Ironically, England has no oil production of its own, yet has 5 oil refineries. Scotland, meanwhile, is to become one of the very few oil-producing countries in the world, to no longer have a refinery to convert its own oil resources into petroleum products. With much of the revenues from Scotland's oil squandered by the UK government on tax breaks for societies better off, the UK has little to show for 5 decades of Scottish oil and gas flowing into the London exchequer. Now Scotland's experiencing a second energy resource boom, renewables. And whilst the devolved administration in Edinburgh has some influence over renewables, energy policy still remains firmly in the grip of the government in London. Scotland has 85% of the UK's renewable energy resources. But the sector, like oil and gas before it, has been sold off to foreign-owned private companies such as Scottish Power Renewables, which is owned by the Spanish utility firm, the Iberdrola Group. The transmission network in the south of Scotland is run by Scottish Power Transmission plc, also owned by the Spanish group Iberdrola, and Scottish Hydro-Electric Transmission plc, part of Scottish and Southern Electricity Networks in the north, which is owned by institutional investors, with the largest single shareholder being American multinational investment company BlackRock Incorporated. Again, the Scottish public has no ownership stake in their own country's resources, unlike Norway, where 90% of its renewable energy sector capacity is publicly owned. Because Scotland's energy resources are not only controlled by the government of another country, but owned by companies from outside Scotland, the Scottish Government, whose budgets are also controlled by the government in London, has no means of keeping energy bills down for consumers in Scotland, where most of the energy is produced. So as energy companies continue to make eye-watering profits, consumers in Scotland, many of whom may be glancing at wind turbines from their windows, pay ever higher energy bills and standing charges, often higher than those of consumers in England. According to the End Fuel Poverty Coalition, energy profits hit £420 billion in recent years, as bills and standing charges continue to rise. As London continues to tighten its grip on Scotland's energy resources, with the creation by the Labour government in London of GB Energy, and the announcement by Keir Starmer of a new electricity superhighway to facilitate Scotland's renewable electricity flowing out of Scotland to power homes in England, the question some are asking is, who do these resources really belong to? The answer will surprise many, and is to be found in our largely hidden history. Scotland's crown, and therefore kingdom, remains intact, but it has been dormant for the past 317 years. That's because no English monarch has ever sworn the Scottish accession oath in its entirety to allow them to become lawful King or Queen of Scots. The crowns of England and Scotland are completely different systems and could not be merged to create a single united kingdom. The Scottish crown represents the community of the realm, the people, whilst authority under the English crown rests with the person wearing it, which is why no English king or queen can ever be prosecuted for any crime under English law, unlike everyone else in England. The clue is in the title of the so-called British monarch, the King of England, not King of the United Kingdom. Why does this matter? Because the Scottish Kingdom, and therefore Scotland itself, remains a territory in its own right under the Crown of Scotland, in which the people, not the monarch or even the government, are sovereign. That means that all of Scotland's resources belong to the people of Scotland and not the English Crown or indeed the English UK state. Because the two kingdoms never merged either in 1707 or even in 1603, when James VI of Scotland became James I of England, when he sat as monarch on both thrones, the UK was just England rebranding itself as the UK following the 1707 treaty, and this has allowed England to effectively take resources, albeit illegally, out of Scotland for its own use ever since. With Scotland unable to earn revenues from its abundant resources, unlike independent countries such as Norway, Scotland is being kept artificially poorer as a result, whilst others, outside of Scotland, make huge profits from resources which belong to the Scottish people. And this situation is destined to continue as Scottish renewables take over from oil, which should have seen Scotland become one of the world's richest countries like Norway, a country with a similar sized population to Scotland. In 2014, in the run-up to the Scottish independence referendum, Scots were told by the UK government in England and the No campaign, "We're better together." Clearly, that is not the case. If you have found this film informative, please like and share, and don't forget to hit the bell icon to be notified of future content from the Scotland channel. For more information about the Scotland channel, visit our website, thescotlandchannel.tv.